Hey everyone, you remember Stephen King's Pet Cemetery where, the dead come back to life, only, different? Of course you do. A sweet little kid comes back as a violent scalpel-wielding maniac. Yeah. Want to hear a true story that mirrors Pet Cemetery? Of course you do. So here we go. Hello, night crawlers and friends and enemies. Welcome to a crossover episode where a case is just so wild it had to be shared on both platforms. Check out the Nightcrawler sessions on YouTube for paranormal investigations with the God Helmet, Estes Sessions, Trance Kit, Paranormal Stories, and more. Also, check out the Exploring Evil podcast on your favorite podcast platform for true crime, often with a paranormal twist. Now let's crawl through the darkness and explore some evil. Mary Louise Day was 13 in 1981 when she mysteriously disappeared from her home in Seaside, California. She was found alive in 2003, more than 22 years after her disappearance. She was alive, but, different. Mary Day was born in Little Falls, New York on February 19, 1968, to Charlotte and Charles Day. She had two younger sisters, Kathy and Sherry. Mary and her sisters didn't have easy childhoods. They were in and out of foster homes in their early years because their mother was often unable or unwilling to care for them. At some point, while the girls were in foster care, Charlotte divorced from Charles and remarried a man named William Ewell. In 1975, Ewell enlisted in the United States Army, and Charlotte attained permanent and full custody of Mary and Kathy shortly thereafter, leaving Sherry behind in foster care. According to Sherry, she was so mad at her mom when she picked her up from the foster home that she peed on her in the car. And Mom took her back to the foster home and said, "Hey, here you go. You can keep this one." Now, that should have been a red flag that none of them should have gone back to Mom, right? Before leaving New York, Charlotte gave birth to a daughter, Billie Jean. The family then moved to an army base in Georgia. By this time, Sherry had been legally adopted by one of her foster families, the Waits family, and was separated from her birth family. In 1978, the family moved to Hawaii due to Ewell being stationed there. Wonder how many people you could get to join if you said, "Hey, you're going to start your service in Hawaii. The first year is going to be in Hawaii." While there, Charlotte gave birth to a son, William Jr. Mary's biological father, Charles Day, was killed in an accident, leaving inheritance money to Mary and Kathy. His remains were cremated. This will come into play later. But the inheritance money they would refer to as their escape plan and use the code word Mohawk when discussing it. So basically, this is kind of a way for them to cope. Like, oh, this horrible thing is happening, but Mohawk, when we turn 18, we're going to be able to collect that inheritance and finally get out of this horrible family. In December 1980, Mary was removed from her mother and stepfather's care and taken into protective custody after it was discovered that William was physically abusing her. The family then moved to Seaside, California following a change in William's base, but Mary was kept in Hawaii until a few months later when she was sent to live with the rest of her family in California. While Mary was in Seaside, she allegedly frequently attempted to run away from her home, but would always be returned by police officers. This, however, was never proven and was only told to police by Charlotte Ewell. On or around July 15, 1981, Mary Day disappeared from her home in Seaside, near the former Army base at Fort Ord, under circumstances that would later draw serious suspicion and speculation. She was just 13 years old. Her parents didn't report her missing, and almost no one aside from them even knew she was missing. In 1992, Sherry Waits Calgaro filed a missing persons report to the Fort Ord military base in California, but by then, 11 years had passed and police didn't even launch a full investigation. Sherry was sent a postcard that stated the police had done a record search and no information was found. Sherry sent information about Mary Day and a photo of her to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in late 1999, at which point an image of how Mary might have looked at the time was developed. Sherry spoke to police regarding Mary's disappearance, and an official investigation was opened in 2002 as Fort Ord was being shut down and all cold cases were being reviewed. Her family were the only ones who knew about her disappearance. Their neighbors were unable to recall them and did not recognize pictures of Mary, who'd not been enrolled in school while living in Seaside. Of course. Kathy was able to give a more detailed account of the night Mary Day disappeared. She says she and Mary stayed home while William, Charlotte, and their two siblings went out to dinner because, of course, they're way more important than the stepkids. When they returned, William's dog, his favorite person in the whole wide world, was sick. He was throwing up and he was in pretty bad shape. They thought that he might be dying, but there was no way for the girls to get a hold of their parents and say, hey, you need to come home, this dog's sick. But William, who apparently cares for dogs more than he cares about children, became extremely angry and for some reason accused Mary of poisoning the dog. And then he began to beat her. Kathy said William began to yell, scaring her, shortly after which all hell broke loose. She further said she remembered the fight between Mary and William and that Mary had been yelling. She concluded by stating that the last time she saw Mary, she had blood coming out of her mouth. The next morning, Kathy said, Mary was no longer in the house. Naturally, she asked her mom where Mary went, and Charlotte told her that Mary ran away and to never speak her name again. You know, like a good parent does, right? Oh, the kid ran away. Let's just not ever talk about her again and just forget about her. Sometime later, the family moved to New York. Sherry was 12 at the time, and Sherry visited them. She noticed that Mary was not with them and asked Charlotte where Mary was. Charlotte again said that Mary had run away, was on drugs, and had become a prostitute. Charlotte had also stated that she had burned all pictures of Mary that she had. When Sherry attempted to ask Kathy while spending the night about what happened to Mary, Kathy said that they were not allowed to talk about it. At age 14, Kathy was also kicked out of the family home and was forced to live on her own. You know, like you do with 14-year-old kids. At age 18, Sherry started questioning the statements her biological mother Charlotte had made, and when getting in touch with her, she was appalled by her birth mother's callous disregard for her sister's whereabouts. She questioned Charlotte and wrote her answers in a tablet to keep a record. One statement that stood out to her, and which she told police that she remembered, was her mother proclaiming that she knew of locations in California in which one could hide a corpse and never had it be found. Are you starting to get a picture of what kind of people we're talking about here? Following this, Sherry began to believe her sister Mary was murdered. Let's talk a little bit about the investigation. After interviewing both Kathy and Sherry, investigators began to believe that Mary had been murdered on the night of her disappearance. In addition to Kathy and Sherry, investigators were able to track down Charlotte and William Buell to Kansas, where they were interviewed by local police. Charlotte reported not remembering many of the facts regarding her daughter's disappearance and that the last time she saw Mary was in 1981 when she ran away. She admitted that she and William should have taken steps to locate Mary after her initial disappearance. You think? She went on to claim that William had filed a runaway report with the Salinas Police Department, but there was no record of anyone reporting her missing prior to 1992. Charlotte had also lied to Sherry when meeting her in 1983 in New York by saying that they had listed her as missing and had searched for her and even had an all-points bulletin placed to help find her. All lies. It was assumed that Charlotte and William chose not to report Mary missing because they were cashing her Social Security benefits at the time of her disappearance. However, investigators and Mary's siblings thought they'd been hiding something sinister about Mary's disappearance, enforced by Charlotte saying in her interview, "If Mary's dead, she's dead." Wow. When police questioned William, he initially claimed that on the night of Mary's disappearance, he'd been checking each bedroom and noticed Mary was not in her bed. You know, like a good stepdad, he was just going around and just making sure that everybody was safe and okay. He said he and Charlotte panicked and contacted police, but again, no record of a phone call. I guess people think that like the police aren't going to keep track of missing person reports. I don't know. Or they just had nothing to say and they thought they could just say, well, we did what we could and no one would check into it. William would later admit to beating Mary on the night she was last seen. He explained that he was extremely angry over his dog's illness and, blaming her, viciously beat her. He said Mary attempted to leave the house and that he used a martial arts technique to try and subdue her. Yeah, you know, like you do to your 13-year-old daughter. Specifically a one-handed choke or strike. So it's not really a martial arts move. I mean, I guess it is, but you basically just put, your dominant hand out and grab them around the throat. Or you do the same thing, only instead of just grabbing, you strike. And in the interview, what he was doing with his hand looked more like he struck her in the throat than held her. This is not a hold to subdue someone who's acting violent, like a safe hold or anything like that. She was not grabbed around the waist or around the arms to, keep her back from hitting or anything. This was something that you would do in a street fight. The morning after Mary went missing, Charlotte told William she saw Satan in his eyes the night before and likened it to him being possessed by a demon. When asked if he could have killed Mary, he denied it. But then, when asked if the demon inside him could have killed her, he responded, "Definitely." Kathy told investigators that shortly after Mary went missing, William told the children to not go in a specific corner of the home's backyard. Investigators brought her back to the old home in 2003 and she directed them to the corner. Cadaver dogs were brought in and they detected the scent of human remains in the area. So let's go over cadaver dogs real quick. I used to think that dogs were completely infallible, but I've heard a lot of stories recently where they have hit on bad sites where there were never any remains, that sort of stuff, that they're not 100%. But cadaver dogs are specifically trained to sniff for human decay. So they're not going to make the mistake of, oh, there was another dog buried there, or there was, an animal that died there. They hit specifically on the scent of human decay. So when police dug there, they uncovered a small child's shoe. The shoe appeared to be a tennis shoe, and Kathy said they often wore that type of footwear as children. But the shoe to me didn't appear to be a 13-year-old shoe, but more like a 6 or 8-year-old. So it was pretty tiny, but I'm no expert in shoe sizes. Investigators believed they had enough evidence to build a credible homicide case and began to compile one against Charlotte and William Buell. In 2008, cadaver dogs that had been working on an unrelated matter alerted near a second home where the Hewells had lived at the Army base in Fort Ord, the house they had moved to shortly after Mary disappeared. What a coincidence, right? I mean, how many people haven't had random cadaver dogs hit in their yard? Like, oh yeah, there were definitely human remains here at one point. Happens to me all the time. Let's jump ahead. November 25th, 2003. A pickup truck was pulled over as a routine traffic stop. The truck had stolen license plates, allegedly, leading to the police collecting and examining the identifications of the passengers. That's what they do all the time. Give me your IDs. One of the passengers was a woman whose Arizona State ID card bore the name of, you guessed it, Mary Day. This also contained the missing Mary's birth date and other pertinent information, as IDs do, right? The woman was detained, and when she was interviewed, she claimed she ran away from her home to avoid abuse from Charlotte and William Huell. Investigators were skeptical as to the credibility of her accounts, as she had a thick Southern accent. Mary Day did not have such an accent, allegedly. Police also discovered her ID had been issued 3 weeks prior to her arrest, which is around the time the homicide investigation began. Investigators initially theorized that the woman was an imposter and took DNA samples in order to determine whether or not her claim was true. Her DNA was compared to that of Charlotte Huell, which revealed that the woman was a biological child of hers. The investigation into Mary's disappearance was closed, and her sister Sherry invited her to live with her family in North Carolina, by the way. Despite the DNA match, Kathy and Sherry also had doubts of Mary's true identity due to her Southern accent and her unwillingness or inability to give a coherent, logical explanation of what actually happened to her after she disappeared from the family home way back in 1981. Kathy didn't believe Mary since she did not remember much from her childhood, including the inheritance and the code word Mohawk. During her stay with Sherry in North Carolina, Mary exhibited bizarre behaviors that led Sherry to theorize that she had multiple personality disorder. So that's pretty serious. She said Mary often told rambling stories that were disjointed and had no logical timelines. Later questions to Mary would elicit different answers than previous ones. Let's talk a little bit about this multiple personality. So Sherry's not just saying that she seemed like a different person, which you could understand if you had been living a completely separate life for 22 years. You would be a different person than the 13-year-old that your family remembered. But on some days, Mary would have her hair pulled back and her makeup done and was bright and happy and outgoing and fun. But then on other days, she wouldn't do her makeup. She had her hair down. She dressed frumpy. She walked different. She actually drug her feet when she walked and walked with her head down and was just kind of mean. So it seemed more like she currently had multiple personalities than it did like her 13-year-old sister was a completely different person than her, current Mary. So that's really interesting. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Apparently, during her stay in North Carolina, Mary made several attempts to overdose with Tylenol and was a severe alcoholic. And she'd also become violent at times, causing a break in the relationship with her sister Sherry, who had 2 small children in her home. It got so bad that Sherry told her sister Mary, "You can't be in my house anymore." And luckily, for some reason, this seems to be a thing on all rural properties ever. There's just a spare trailer. So she sent her to stay in the trailer. And at one point, Mary called her sister Sherry over and said she needed help. When Sherry opened the door, Mary busted a beer bottle over her head for no reason. I guess this was the frumpy, scary Mary. Eventually, they moved from Arizona to Missouri, Warsaw, Missouri to be more specific, and she had remarried, and police reports showed that Mary's husband was also abusive to her. How does this happen? It seems like anybody who's damaged for whatever reason ends up with another abuser. I don't get how it happens. I don't know if abusers naturally seek that out and their intuition attracts them to that person, or they plan on it somehow. But it seems that people that have been abused always end up in more abusive relationships. It's really a sad cycle. And Mary stayed at her home in Missouri until she passed in 2017. Sherry and her daughter visited Mary in Missouri shortly before her death, but Mary still offered no logical explanations or timelines after her disappearance. Without knowing all the facts of the case and wishing to just end the whole debate and move on, Sherry decided to just go ahead and accept this woman as her sister Mary. In 2017, authorities learned that Mary was living in Warsaw, Missouri, and was dying of cancer. Seaside Police Chief Judy Velos traveled to speak with her in hospice. During a 90-minute interview, Mary said she had run away and spent the early years with an older woman, B.J. Ward, in Salinas, California. Mary died 9 days after the interview, and Velos later considered the case closed. She had also located a photograph of Mary taken in 1983, after the year she vanished, reinforcing that Mary had been alive beyond 1981, and said, quote, "I was 100% convinced that the person I spoke to was Mary Louise Day. No question." No funeral was held after Mary's death. Sherry began to have doubts about the woman's identity again after a 48 Hours episode about Mary aired, and she learned some more details. Sherry and Kathy noticed some discrepancies. The woman lacked memories of childhood events. She couldn't recall personal details such as siblings' code words. She spoke with a southern dialect despite growing up on the West Coast. Other odd behaviors and unidentified personal history raised more questions. Sherry said at one point, "I think my sister Mary Louise Day was killed on a summer day in 1981. I've felt for a very long time that she's gone." Detective Joe Bertagna, who led the reopened investigation, described Phoenix Mary's case as somehow sought out by Charlotte and William to pose as Mary Day to avoid prosecution, though no charges were ever filed against the parents. No one knows exactly what happened the night Mary disappeared. No missing persons report was initially filed, and the family gave conflicting accounts. The cadaver dog alerts and buried personal items raised homicide suspicions, but no body was ever found. Family members, especially sisters, questioned whether the woman identified by DNA was truly their sister, given memory gaps and behavioral inconsistencies. The parents were never charged with wrongdoing. They didn't even go after him for cashing the Social Security checks because, hey, that's just our tax money. I mean, no big deal. They're just committing fraud. Okay. The Mary Louise Day case is often called one of the most perplexing missing person cases in U.S. history. We'll talk about key suspects and theories after a quick break. Welcome back, everyone. The first theory is that Mary was killed during an episode of abuse. William Huell, the stepfather, was violent toward Mary, and the last adult known to have confronted her before the disappearance. The cadaver dog alerts focused on property he controlled, but he was never charged. A corresponding theory is that Charlotte covered up Mary's death or enabled abuse, which is a fact that she enabled abuse. She failed to report Mary missing. She told the family that Mary ran away. She said not to talk about her. But DNA later confirmed that Phoenix Mary was her biological child. It should be said that although Charlotte was not a looker, she got around quite a bit and had a bunch of different kids with different daddies, and who knows, this could have been a random love child that the other family never knew about, never knew that this child even existed. Another theory is that Mary escaped abuse and survived under the radar. This is supported by the DNA confirmation and the 1983 photograph, and Mary herself maintained this version until death. So when we're talking about the fact that she doesn't remember certain things from childhood, I think if this was a person that was making it up or was set up by the Hewells to try and stop them from getting charged with anything, the first thing she would have remembered is the inheritance. Oh, yeah, I remember the inheritance. I don't remember the other stuff, but I remember I got a bunch of money waiting for me. So that kind of goes with the imposter theory. Another biological child was substituted to prevent prosecution, and this was raised by detectives and siblings. So it's not just a law enforcement theory. And this was based on a lack of memories and the behavioral differences. But again, DNA doesn't lie. Another theory is that severe childhood trauma caused dissociation and memory loss, and that would explain the gaps in her memory and would be very consistent with abuse survivor psychology. And this is supported by some of the investigators after the final interview. So what this means is that when someone goes through trauma like she went through, the mind does funny things. And a split personality is kind of a super severe reaction to trauma, but it does happen. So another theory is that Mary was killed and secretly buried and later moved. And this would be backed up by the cadaver dog alerts and the buried items if they were truly hers. But no remains were ever recovered, and there was no forensic confirmation. So they didn't try and get DNA off of the shoe or anything that was buried, which would have probably brought a lot of light to this case. So there's no missing person report at the time of the disappearance. There's physical evidence without a body, DNA certainty versus family belief, conflicting interpretations by law enforcement, a confirmed identity, unverifiable life story. That's why this case is insane. So you have a young girl who allegedly went missing in 1981, and my theory is that she did run away. I think that they would have found her remains if she'd been buried there. I don't think that the stuff there belonged to her. I think that this was just a coincidence. And if it did belong to her, it may have been something symbolic that this guy did after killing her, because, you know, killers are weird too. We talk about that all the time. The evidence that they leave behind that you would think would be common sense, like searches on their computers, stuff like that. And it's hard to get in the mind of someone who would hurt a child. That's not really a place I want to be. But I think that this trauma is what led to her strange behavior. And she says that she was taken in, but we don't know for sure how her life was after she was taken in. There could be points where she ran away and did work as a prostitute. We don't know how young she started abusing alcohol. That can also damage your mind. This is kind of a perfect mix for someone with severe trauma to develop a split personality or a trauma reaction. So that would explain why she looked different, sounded different, walked different, acted different, and could be violent at times. You see what I mean? She allegedly passed away, but she came back different. What do you think? So that's it for this case, friends, enemies, and night crawlers. If you're a true crime fan, let me know at exploringevil@gmail.com. You can listen to the podcast on your favorite platform and keep an eye out for the YouTube page, which is going to be coming soon. If you are into the paranormal, hopefully you're into both actually, but if you're into the paranormal, let me know about it at nightcrawlersessions@gmail.com. We are at Nightcrawler Sessions on YouTube, and there will be an audio-only podcast coming out soon. Let me know what you think, and keep an eye out for new episodes of both shows dropping weekly. And remember, the shadows were always closer than you thought.